When people advocate for capitalism, even though it's a truism to say this, it's important not to forget that it's not just some abstract structure. It's capitalism every day. Hierarchical systems require the subordination of the masses to power in their everyday lives. However, naked power generates resistance. The maintenance of hierarchy therefore requires that individuals be socialized into the acceptance of their own subordination. In 1975, the Trilateral Commission published a report called The Crisis of Democracy. The report argued that in North America, Western Europe and Japan, the popular movements of the 1960s had given workers, women and people of colour a greater voice in society, undermining political and economic authorities. In short, the public were becoming too difficult to govern. Samuel Huntington wrote, "Authority has been challenged not only in government, but in trade unions, business enterprises, schools and universities, professional associations, churches and civic groups. In the past, those institutions which have played the major role in the indoctrination of the young in their rights and obligations as members of society have been the family, the church, the school and the army. The effectiveness of all these institutions as a means of socialization has declined severely. Our education system doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like the mass media, it carries out certain functions and has social consequences for different class interests in society. In totalitarian societies, public opinion is irrelevant. The masses can be bludgeoned into obedience. But in liberal democracies, this isn't acceptable, and so managing public opinion is crucial for maintaining hierarchy. As Edward Bernays said, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organised habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. In one of my previous videos, I talked about how the economic structure of the mass media engineers public opinion. However, thought control only has an indirect effect on what people do. The mass media, although being hugely influential, have limited power in this respect. They exercise ideological control. On the other hand, the education system does what the mass media cannot do: direct behavioural control. Education is a production line. The population are divided into age groups which undergo systematic instruction. Instruction is divided into a hierarchy of different subjects, with maths and languages prioritised at the top, the humanities in the middle, and the arts at the bottom. These subjects are split into a timetable, roughly over a 7-hour day. During instruction, information will be transmitted into the heads of children by what are called teachers. After a certain amount of time, children will regurgitate the information that they have been given during a standardised test. The standard of the test will be determined in order to produce a hierarchy of students. If everyone gets a good grade, there will be no hierarchy, so that's too easy. And if everyone gets a bad grade, there will also be no hierarchy, so that's too difficult. Good grades are therefore scarce. It is impossible for everyone to receive a good grade. Children are therefore forced into competition with one another because educational attainment is, by definition, mutually exclusive. Standardized tests will increase in difficulty for different age groups. To participate in higher standardized tests, students have to meet entry requirements, most likely their success in previous tests. The grades that a student receives will affect their socioeconomic status and future prospects in a non-trivial way. The content for memorization will be selected by powerful institutions, namely the government and corporations. If we assume that these institutions will not seek to undermine their own interests, they will not give out self-subverting information. Education, therefore, at least in its current form, constitutes a filtering system, in which status and prestige are awarded to children depending on their systematic obedience to authority, and subjects are prioritised according to how compatible they are with the standardised testing model.
What is a circle? Philly Henlow.
A circle is a closed curve in which all endpoints on the circumference are equally distanced from the center point.
Very good.
The further up the educational hierarchy you go, the more obedience and conformity you will find. The population will become accustomed to a series of authoritarian social norms because their very livelihood depends on it. This model of schooling was first implemented under Prussian military rule in the early 19th century, primarily to serve the interests of industrialists and state bureaucrats. The Prussian education system was later implemented in several other countries, including the United States. Frederick Winslow Taylor's system of scientific management, designed to discipline the labour force and increase the power of management, was later implemented in American schools. Alexander Ingalls, an advocate of the system that had developed, outlined what he thought should be the 6 basic functions of school in his book Principles of Secondary Education. Number 1. The adjustive function. Schools ought to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority in order to create obedient children that will seamlessly fit into their future social environments without causing too much of a fuss. Number 2. The integrating function. There must be a set of values and ideals that are to be universally accepted by all of the children without question, not due to any concern for egalitarian values, but in order to create as much social conformity and homogeneity as possible. Number 3. The diagnostic function. The work of individuals must be logged mathematically, and schools ought to determine the social roles of children in the future and direct them towards the desired ends. Number 4. The differentiating function. Outside of the shared set of values and ideals, differences between students must be accentuated as much as possible, not to celebrate their individuality, but to prepare them for the economic purpose of carrying out highly specialized labor. This does not conflict with conformity and obedience, but goes hand in hand with it. Number 5. The selective function. The schools should essentially carry out social Darwinism by identifying and, quote, eliminating those individuals who are unable to meet the demands set due to their so-called native capacities, and rewarding people who can demonstrate obedience more effectively. Number 6. The propedeutic function. The education system as a whole ought to be so constituted as to further the development of an elite class of intellectuals separate from the great majority of people, which will take care of the system in the future. You can perhaps see how the model of standardized testing for obedience in tightly divided subjects in order to create a hierarchy of students serves these functions remarkably well. It forces people into the position of manipulable tools in the machine, weeds out those people who might think too much and cause a crisis of democracy, and helps to create a generally conformist and docile labour force that will obediently bend to the will of their capitalist masters. As George Carlin said, governments and corporations don't want a well-informed population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
They want obedient workers. Obedient workers.
Johann Fichte, a proponent of the Prussian system, said that the higher classes constitute the mind of the single large whole of humanity, the lower classes constitute its limbs. The vast majority of people are not supposed to do any thinking, they're supposed to execute the demands of an elite minority. The masses must be dumbed down and told what to think. Fichte believed that education should completely destroy free will. He said that the schools must fashion the person and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will. Let's consider some other implications of our education system. Other than the minimal knowledge required to generate people who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, as Carlin said, what little lessons can we expect the average child to acquire as they are being shipped along the educational production line? John Taylor Gatto listed 7. Number 1. Confusion. Throughout the school day, rather than tailoring to the needs of individuals, children will not have any control over the periods of time they spend on a given subject. This ensures that significant numbers of people will not be given adequate time to digest the information being transmitted to them at their own pace, helping to foster the creation of a bewildered herd with little to no idea of what the fuck is going on. Number 2. Indifference. The children will understand that what's called learning is about assuming the position of an empty receptacle into which unquestionable absolute truth is poured, and that this process can be turned on and off like a light switch, as well as merely being a means to achieving so-called good grades. The schools should generate indifference to anything that could remotely be described as real learning. The schools are factories for creating systemic ignorance. Number 3. Class position. Members of the working class should be well aware that the education system is not designed for them, but in fact serves the strategic and economic interests of corporate and state bureaucrats. As they are moved along the conveyor belt, the people should know their place and understand that it's there to provide an obedient workforce that can be disciplined and controlled by managers with a minimum amount of hassle. Number 4. Emotional dependency. The children should become emotionally dependent on so-called positive reinforcements, a term originally coined when training lab rats, I should note, such as a pat on the head, a smile, an A+, or any other kind of reward from above. In other words, doggy biscuit bribes to make children follow instructions. The reason for this is to train and socialize the children to embrace behaviorist methods of control, techniques originally tested on animals to get children to stop doing what you don't want them to do and start doing what you do want them to do.
So the bird isn't acting independently. Its behavior is shaped by controlling its environment.
Number 5. Intellectual dependency. Children will be socialized to believe that authority is the ultimate source of unquestionable truth. Children are to be put into an atmosphere in which questioning authority is the worst thing you can do, even if the authority makes an incorrect statement. It's not about truth, it's about obedience, and truth is only valuable insofar as it fosters obedience. Indeed, a far better test of intellectual dependency is to get children to believe anything that an authority says, even if it's totally stupid. Number 6. Provisional self-esteem. Children will be constantly beaten over the head with the idea of so-called mutual respect. This gives the impression of a mutually beneficial situation, but in reality the idea of so-called mutual respect is basically a device used to explain to the children that they will be respected not in the Kantian sense of respecting them as human beings, but only insofar as they do what is asked of them and demonstrate obedience. Respect means that children must ask for permission to go to the toilet. It means veneration of authority and degradation of the individual. Number 7. The impossibility of hiding. Children are to be made to feel utterly powerless. Every single piece of work they produce and everything they do must be subjected to constant and systematic surveillance, examination and evaluation, while so-called progress must be logged in cumulative records. The fact that they are being watched all the time should help to make the children feel as small as possible and understand that their ultimate purpose in life is to assume the position of minuscule objects, to be placed under the absolute control of people with more power and status than them. By now it should be fairly apparent that the education system has very little at all to do with learning. It's about making children internalize authoritarian social norms and behavioral patterns and understand their position in the hierarchical society and training people to be mindless corporate slaves. It's about establishing to young children that there is a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and manufacturing a general culture of obedience and conformity. That's what the educational structure is for. The education system assumes this function because this is what best serves the interests of centralized concentrations of political and economic power. Any form of organization based on authoritarian institutions controlling the means of production requires the creation and maintenance of an obedient labor force that will spend their working lives taking orders from people. So why would education be structured in any other way? Education looks the way it does because the disgusting system we have requires it. From the very beginning, it was built by and for elites, not to benevolently provide people with knowledge. During its inception, many parents resisted compulsory schooling, sometimes even violently, because they had a very clear idea of what it was about. In Barnstable on Cape Cod, resistance was so strong that state militia had to be deployed to march the children into school. But not only is the format of education, that is, standardized testing for obedience and so on, structured for the benefit of economic elites, but for the past 30 years, the idea that education should even be provided as a public utility has come under attack, because the whole notion of pooling resources together to provide for needs is wrong, according to neoliberal doctrine. Larger numbers of people are getting into higher education over time, consequently undermining the possibility of it being reserved for a small academic elite. However, this does mean that individuals are under greater economic pressures to pursue higher education to improve their future prospects in the people market. To counteract this, further disciplinary measures are implemented in the form of tuition fee increases, massive tuition fee increases. This helps to either segregate higher education as being something reserved only for the wealthy, or on the other hand, trap the vast majority of students into a system of perpetual debt that they will spend decades attempting to repay. People who go into higher education wanting to be artists, musicians, dancers, writers and philosophers end up finding themselves spending several years cooped up in a cubicle somewhere, toiling away and producing reports that nobody reads, dreaming about what it would be like to behave like a human being for once, although that possibility was taken care of a long time ago. Now they are subordinated to the consumer economy, and now they must spend all of their so-called free time miserably slumped on a sofa watching spirit-crushing corporate propaganda on a flickering television because their time on the hamster wheel has left them physically and emotionally destroyed. Meanwhile, the more successful members of the intelligentsia will go on and on and on about how this kind of heinous social damage can be repaired if only we just elected the correct people, got rid of the incorrect laws, and implemented the correct ones. And of course, if the public ever becomes so curious and so arrogant as to never find the humility to submit to a civil rule, if they ever have the audacity, the temerity to consider running their own lives for once, if they ever dare to cause a crisis of democracy, they must be subjected to constant, unrelenting ridicule and be beaten over the head with legitimizing myths, excuses for why the imprisonment of the population must be continued. It is when the population refuse to accept any more of these excuses that the social revolution begins.